It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a vast fortune must be in want of authenticity. Alexander Blackwood had known this truth from his earliest days of consciousness, when he first perceived the falseness that surrounded him like a poisonous fog. 28 years of existence had done nothing to alter this perception. Rather, it had sharpened it to a point that now pierced his very soul with each social interaction. Mr. Blackwood, the quarterly reports show exceptional growth across all divisions, said Mr. Peterson, the chief financial officer of Blackwood Enterprises, his voice a mixture of deference and practiced enthusiasm. Your father's legacy continues to flourish under your guidance. Alexander's gaze traveled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of the conference room, across the steel and glass landscape of Manhattan that stretched before him like a monument to human ambition. The April sun glinted off the buildings, creating an illusion of diamonds scattered across the city, an apt metaphor, he thought, for the beautiful facade that concealed the rot within. My father's legacy, he echoed, the words hollow in his mouth. And what precisely is that legacy, Mr. Peterson? Acquisitions built on the backs of those who could not defend themselves, wealth accumulated through strategic bankruptcies that left families destitute while we prospered. The room fell into uncomfortable silence. The board members exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of confusion and concern. They were not accustomed to philosophical ruminations during quarterly reviews. Perhaps, Alexander continued, his voice gaining strength, it is time to consider what legacy I wish to leave behind, not as Alexander Blackwood, heir to a fortune built on questionable ethics, but as a man who chose a different path. Mrs. Harrison, the eldest member of the board and his father's most trusted advisor, leaned forward. Alexander, your father entrusted this company to you because he believed in your vision, but part of that vision must include stability. The shareholders want profit, Alexander interrupted, and they shall have it. But I intend to ensure that profit no longer comes at the expense of human dignity. He stood abruptly, straightening his impeccably tailored suit. I require time for consideration. I will return with a new directive within a month. Until then, maintain operations as established. Without awaiting a response, he strode from the room, feeling the weight of their stares upon his back. His assistant, Thomas, fell into step beside him as he made his way to the private elevator. Sir, your 3 o'clock with the Japanese investors? Cancel it, Alexander said. Cancel everything for the next month. Thomas faltered mid-stride. Everything, sir. Everything. The elevator doors slid open and Alexander stepped inside. I require solitude for reflection. Of course, sir. But may I ask where you'll be? Alexander considered the question as the doors began to close. Somewhere authentic, he replied. 3 days later, Alexander stood in front of the modest brick building that housed Horizon Books, an independent bookstore in Brooklyn that had somehow survived the digital revolution. His father had acquired the property years ago, intending to demolish it for a luxury condominium project, but had died before implementation. It had remained in the Blackwood portfolio, largely forgotten amidst more lucrative ventures. He had exchanged his designer suits for jeans and a simple button-down shirt. His usually perfectly styled hair was now slightly disheveled, and he'd allowed the beginning of a beard to shadow his jaw. To complete his transformation, he wore non-prescription glasses with thick black frames. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. The scent of paper, ink, and coffee enveloped him, a welcome change from the sterile atmosphere of corporate boardrooms. The store was larger than it appeared from outside, with shelves extending into the depths of the building. A coffee counter occupied one corner, where a barista with vibrant blue hair crafted beverages for customers who lounged in mismatched armchairs. Behind the main counter stood a woman approximately his own age, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, tendrils escaping to frame a face that was striking rather than conventionally beautiful. Her eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, were focused intently on a leather-bound volume before her. She didn't look up at his entrance. Alexander approached the counter, clearing his throat gently. "Excuse me." The woman held up one finger, a universal sign for "wait a moment," without lifting her gaze from the page. Alexander found himself momentarily speechless. In his experience, people leapt to attention at his slightest gesture. After completing her paragraph, she marked her place with a thin ribbon and looked up. "How may I help you?" Her voice was low and melodious, with an undercurrent of authority that belied her youth. Her gaze was direct, assessing him without a trace of the deference he had come to expect. He began, then paused, unsure of how to proceed. The plan had seemed simple: pose as an ordinary person, seeking employment, experience life without the Blackwood name opening every door, understand the true impact of his company's decisions on regular people. But now, faced with this woman's penetrating gaze, the words stuck in his throat. "You're looking for a book," she prompted, a hint of impatience coloring her tone. "Actually, I noticed the 'Help Wanted' sign in the window," he said, finding his voice at last. "I'm interested in applying for the position." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Do you have any book-selling experience?" "No," he admitted, "but I'm a quick learner, and I have a genuine passion for literature." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "A genuine passion for literature," she repeated, her tone verging on mockery. "And what literature might that be, Mr. Black?" he said, shortening his surname as planned. "Alexander Black. I particularly admire the Brontes, Austen Hardy, the great Victorian novelists who delved into the human condition beneath the rigid social structures of their time." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or a reluctant acknowledgement of his unexpected response. "Interesting choices for a man in 2025, she said. "Most people your age claim to love Hemingway or Kerouac to sound intellectual." Alexander felt heat rise to his face. "I find their exploration of moral complexity and social constraints still relevant today. Societies change, but human nature remains consistent." She studied him for a moment longer, then extended her hand. "Eleanor Bennett. I own Horizon Books." He took her hand, noting the calluses that spoke of physical labor, so different from the soft, manicured hands of the women in his usual circles. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Bennett. The position is part-time, minimum wage plus a modest employee discount on books. Hours are variable, and you'd be expected to do everything from running the register to shelving books to cleaning the bathrooms. Still interested, Mr. Black?" The sum she named as minimum wage would barely cover a single meal at the restaurants he frequented. He found the prospect both terrifying and exhilarating. "Yes, absolutely. Can you start tomorrow?" 9 a.m. sharp. "Tomorrow," he agreed, somewhat dazed by the swiftness of her decision. Eleanor handed him a form. "Fill this out before you leave. I'll need identification and tax documents tomorrow. Don't be late, Mr. Black. I have no patience for tardiness." With that, she returned to her book, dismissing him as effectively as if she'd turned her back. Alexander moved to a small table to complete the form, his mind racing. He had expected the process to be more difficult, had prepared elaborate references and a backstory that apparently wouldn't be needed. As he wrote, he observed Eleanor covertly. She moved through the store with purpose, assisting customers with recommendations delivered with succinct precision, reorganizing displays with an artist's eye for detail. Occasionally, she exchanged comments with the blue-haired barista that made them both laugh, a sound so genuine it made Alexander realize how rarely he heard true laughter in his own world. When a customer became agitated over a special order delay, Eleanor handled the situation with a firm grace that diffused the tension without sacrificing her dignity. There was something compelling about her self-possession, her absolute comfort in her own skin. Alexander completed the form and returned it to the counter. Eleanor glanced at it briefly before filing it away. "Tomorrow, Mr. Black," she said, not looking up. "Don't forget proper footwear. You'll be standing most of the day." "I'll remember," he promised. "Thank you for this opportunity." Now she did look up, her expression puzzled. "It's a retail job, Mr. Black. not a kidney donation. Save your gratitude for something that matters. He left the store, feeling strangely chastened yet invigorated. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, someone had spoken to him without agenda or artifice. The sensation was as refreshing as diving into cool water on a sweltering day. That night, in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Alexander shed his disguise and reclined on his Italian leather sofa, a glass of 30-year-old scotch in his hand. The contrast between this life and the one he would temporarily adopt tomorrow was stark enough to inspire vertigo. His phone buzzed with messages from board members, business associates, and social acquaintances, all seeking the attention of Alexander Blackwood, heir to billions. None knowing or caring about Alexander Black, the bookstore clerk who would earn minimum wage. Alexander set the glass down untouched and walked to the window. The city spread before him like a carpet of light, beautiful and distant. Somewhere in that tapestry was a small bookstore, where a sharp-tongued woman had looked at him without recognition or deference, seeing only a man seeking employment. To authenticity, he whispered to his reflection in the glass, wondering if he would find what he sought, or merely lose himself in yet another illusion of his own making. Morning found Alexander awake before his alarm, a rare occurrence. He dressed with care in clothes that would not betray his wealth, well-made but not designer, comfortable but not sloppy. He arranged for a car to drop him several blocks from Horizon Books, determined to maintain his charade. The bookstore was not yet open when he arrived, but he could see Eleanor through the window, moving purposefully among the shelves. He checked his watch. 8:45 a.m. 15 minutes early, yet she was already deeply engaged in work. He knocked gently on the glass. Eleanor looked up, momentary confusion crossing her features before recognition dawned. She approached the door, keys jangling in her hand. "Punctuality," she said as she unlocked the door. "A promising start, Mr. Black." The next 8 hours were a blur of activity that left Alexander both exhausted and exhilarated. Eleanor proved to be a demanding but thorough instructor, showing him the complex inventory system, the cash register's idiosyncrasies, the precise method for shelving books, and the careful art of customer engagement. "Listen more than you speak," she advised as they arranged a new display. "Bookselling isn't about pushing your preferences. It's about connecting readers with the right book for them. Ask questions. Pay attention to what lights up their eyes." By closing time, Alexander's feet ached, his back protested, and his mind buzzed with new information. Yet he felt strangely accomplished in a way that closing multi-million-dollar deals had never made him feel. Eleanor counted the day's receipts as he swept the floor. Another new experience. "You did better than expected," she said without looking up. "Your recommendation of Jane Eyre to that teenage girl was surprisingly insightful." Alexander paused in his sweeping. She mentioned feeling like an outsider. Jane's resilience in the face of rejection seemed appropriate. Eleanor's lips curved in a small smile. "Yes, well, most men would have directed her to something less challenging. The Fault in Our Stars or some such nonsense. You don't approve of contemporary young adult literature? I approve of quality, whether it was written yesterday or 300 years ago." She closed the register with a decisive click. "Most people underestimate young readers. You didn't. It's refreshing." The unexpected compliment warmed him more than he cared to admit. "Thank you. Don't let it go to your head," she said briskly. "You still shelved the mystery section out of order. Tomorrow you'll need to fix that before we open." As they prepared to leave, Alexander noticed Eleanor wincing slightly as she reached for her coat. "Are you injured?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just an old shoulder issue. It flares up sometimes when the weather changes." She glanced toward the window, where rain had begun to fall. "Speaking of which, do you have far to go? It's getting nasty out there." "Not too far," he lied, realizing he had dismissed his driver and would need to call for another or brave public transportation. Eleanor studied his face, then sighed. "Look, my apartment is just upstairs. If you want to wait out the worst of it, I can make tea. The forecast says it should pass in an hour." The invitation surprised him. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's tea, Mr. Black, not a marriage proposal," she said with that now familiar blend of impatience and dry humor. "But suit yourself. 8:30 tomorrow, and remember about the mystery section." With that, she locked the store and disappeared through a side door that presumably led to her apartment. Alexander stood in the rain for a moment, oddly disappointed in himself for declining her offer, before turning toward the nearest subway station, a mode of transportation he had not used since his university days. That night, as he soaked his aching body in his marble bathtub, Alexander found himself wondering about Eleanor Bennett. Who was she? Beyond the sharp-tongued bookseller, what had shaped her into this fiercely independent woman who spoke her mind without regard for social niceties? And why did he find himself so drawn to her particular brand of abrasive honesty? Questions without immediate answers, a novelty for a man accustomed to having all information at his fingertips. He found he rather enjoyed the mystery. The following weeks passed in a curious rhythm of discovery and deception. Alexander found himself increasingly drawn into the small world of Horizon Books, with its eccentric customers and the intimate community that had formed around Eleanor's careful curation. Each day brought new lessons, not merely in the mechanics of bookselling, but in the art of genuine human connection. "You're improving," Eleanor remarked one afternoon as they restocked the poetry section together. "Mrs. Abernathy actually smiled at you today." "I've never seen her smile at anyone except her dachshund." Alexander felt a disproportionate surge of pride at this modest praise. "She has excellent taste in early romantic poetry. We had a fascinating discussion about Wordsworth's concept of the sublime." Eleanor paused, a volume of Keats suspended between shelf and hand. "You continue to surprise me, Mr. Black. Most people with your—" she gestured vaguely at his entire person, "appearance don't typically have such depth of literary knowledge." "My appearance?" he echoed, suddenly self-conscious. Had his disguise somehow faltered? "Yes, the whole—" she made another encompassing gesture. "Conventionally attractive, clean-cut man thing. Usually, that combination comes with tedious opinions about Bukowski and a tendency to mansplain Catcher in the Rye to me." Alexander felt heat rise to his face, both at the casual acknowledgement of his attractiveness and the unflattering stereotype she had assigned him. "Perhaps you shouldn't judge books by their covers, Miss Bennett," he said with more sharpness than he intended. She looked at him with genuine surprise, then burst into unexpected laughter, a rich, throaty sound that seemed to fill the narrow aisle. "Touché, Mr. Black, a bookseller hoisted by her own petard." The moment crystallized something for Alexander. Eleanor's prickly exterior concealed not coldness, but a profound wariness. She expected disappointment from people and armored herself accordingly. That she had just acknowledged her own prejudice, however obliquely, felt like a small victory. "Alexander," he said suddenly. Her brows drew together in confusion. "What?" "My name is Alexander. After nearly a month of working together, perhaps we could dispense with Mr. Black and Miss Bennett." She seemed to consider this proposition with unwarranted seriousness. "I suppose that would be acceptable, Alexander." His name in her mouth sounded different somehow, invested with meaning beyond its syllables. "You may call me Eleanor, but not Ellie. Never Ellie." "I wouldn't dream of it," he promised, sensing a story behind the prohibition but knowing better than to ask. "Eleanor suits you better anyway. Dignified, literary." "Now you're mocking me," she said, but without heat. "Not at all. Names have power. They should be respected." She studied him with that intense gaze that always made him feel transparent. "Yes," she said finally, "they should." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several customers, and the moment dissolved into the practicalities of commerce. But something had shifted, subtle yet significant, like the first hairline crack in a dam. That evening, as they closed the shop together, Eleanor said, "Some friends and I are meeting at the Inkwell tonight. It's a pub around the corner. Nothing fancy, just drinks and conversation. You're welcome to join us, if you have no other plans." The invitation was delivered with such studied casualness that Alexander immediately recognized its importance. This was no mere social pleasantry. This was Eleanor opening a door to her private life. "I'd like that very much," he said, careful to match her nonchalant tone while his pulse inexplicably accelerated. The inkwell proved to be a cozy establishment with worn wooden tables and walls lined with bookshelves, a fitting extension of Horizon Books' aesthetic. Eleanor's friends occupied a corner table, the blue-haired barista from the coffee counter, whom he now knew as Zoe, a lanky young man with horn-rimmed glasses who was introduced as Marcus, a graduate student in comparative literature, and a woman with silver-streaked black hair and an array of jangling bangles, who embraced Eleanor warmly before being introduced as Diana, Eleanor's former professor and mentor. "So you're the mysterious new employee?" Diana said, evaluating Alexander over the rim of her wineglass. "Eleanor says you have surprisingly non-terrible literary opinions for someone who looks like you could be on the cover of GQ." "Diana!" Eleanor protested, color rising to her cheeks. "What? It's a compliment. Subverting expectations is always interesting." Diana turned back to Alexander. "So what's your story, Alexander Black? Eleanor says you appeared out of nowhere with an impressive knowledge of Victorian literature and no retail experience." Alexander had prepared for such questions, crafting a background that would explain his education while justifying his apparent career downgrade. "I was in finance," he said, the half-truth coming easily to his lips. "Good money, but soul-crushing work. When my father died last year, I realized I didn't want to spend my life serving the god of profit." This much was true. His father's sudden heart attack had indeed prompted his recent existential questioning. The rest was carefully constructed fiction. "So I quit, traveled for a while, reassessed priorities. Now I'm trying to build a life around things that actually matter to me. Books have always been my refuge." Diana nodded approvingly. "A man who chooses meaning over money. Rare enough to be noteworthy." "Don't canonize him yet," Eleanor said dryly. "He still can't operate the espresso machine without supervision." The group laughed, and Alexander found himself drawn into their circle with surprising ease. These were people who valued ideas over status, who debated the merits of obscure poets with the same passion others reserved for sports teams or stock portfolios. Their conversation ranged from literary theory to political activism, to the gentrification threatening their beloved neighborhood, including, Alexander noted with a stab of guilt, a development project he now realized was one of Blackwood Enterprises' investments. "The problem isn't development itself," Eleanor was saying, her eyes bright with conviction. "It's development without conscience. These corporate vultures swoop in, buy up properties, drive out small businesses and residents who've been here for generations, all to build luxury condos that sit half empty as investment properties for the ultra-wealthy." Alexander shifted uncomfortably in his seat, acutely aware that he was precisely the kind of ultra-wealthy she despised. "Perhaps not all developers have such callous intentions," he suggested carefully. Eleanor fixed him with a skeptical look. "Intent is irrelevant when the outcome destroys communities. These billionaires, like that Blackwood heir who inherited everything from his cutthroat father, they don't see neighborhoods, they see profit margins." The direct mention of his family name sent a jolt of alarm through Alexander. "You know the Blackwoods?" he asked, struggling to keep his tone casual. "Know them? No. Know of them. Unfortunately." Eleanor's expression darkened. "Blackwood Enterprises owns this building, actually. They've owned it for years, ever since they bought out the previous landlord, who was drowning in medical debt. We've been expecting the eviction notice any day." Alexander felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. This was worse than he had imagined. His company, his family, was directly threatening Eleanor's livelihood, her passion, her community, and she had no idea she was sharing a table with the very man who could sign her eviction order. "That's terrible," he managed to say, his mouth suddenly dry. "Is there nothing that can be done?" Marcus shook his head. "We've tried everything. Petitions, community board meetings, even approached some preservation societies since the building has historical significance. But when you're fighting billions of dollars, you generally lose. I won't give up without a fight, Eleanor said, her jaw set in a determination that Alexander found both admirable and terrifying. Horizon Books matters. What we do here matters. If Alexander Blackwood himself walked through that door right now, I'd tell him exactly what I think of his so-called business empire. Alexander took a large swallow of his beer, using the moment to compose himself. "What would you say?" he asked, unable to resist the masochistic curiosity. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes intense. "I'd ask him if he's ever considered the human cost of his balance sheets. If he's ever walked through a neighborhood and seen it as something other than a real estate opportunity. If he's ever loved anything the way we love this bookstore, this community." Her words struck him with physical force. The worst part was that she was right. Until very recently, he had viewed the world primarily through the lens of profit and loss, had made decisions affecting thousands of lives with the cold calculation of spreadsheets rather than human consideration. "Maybe he doesn't know," Alexander heard himself saying, "about this specific situation, I mean. Large corporations have many layers of management. Perhaps decisions are made without the CEO's direct involvement." Eleanor's laugh held no humor. "That's the oldest excuse in the book. I didn't know." Convenient ignorance doesn't absolve responsibility. If you profit from a system, you're responsible for its consequences, whether you sign the paperwork yourself or not. The conversation eventually drifted to other topics, but Alexander remained shaken. He had embarked on this experiment, seeking authenticity, but now found himself entangled in a web of deception far more complicated than he had anticipated. Every moment of connection with Eleanor and her friends was simultaneously genuine and fraudulent, his feelings real, his identity false. As the evening wound down, Eleanor surprised him again by offering to walk part of the way home with him. Outside, the spring night was cool and clear, the city's usual cacophony muted to a distant hum. "You've been quiet since we discussed the Blackwood situation," she observed as they walked. "Did we scare you off with our anti-capitalist rantings?" Alexander forced a smile. "Not at all. I felt guilty, I suppose. My background is in finance. I was part of that world, even if I've stepped away from it now." She considered this, her pace slowing. "There's a difference between participating in a system because you have limited choices and actively perpetuating its worst aspects. We're all compromised in some way." She glanced at him, her expression softening slightly. "The important thing is that you're trying to live differently now. That counts for something." Her unexpected grace pierced him more deeply than her earlier condemnation. "Does it? Count for something, I mean." They had stopped walking now, standing beneath the glow of a street lamp that cast Eleanor's face in warm light and shadow. "I think so," she said softly. "I have to believe that people can change, that they can choose to be better. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" For one mad moment, Alexander considered confessing everything. His true identity, his company's role in threatening her bookstore, his growing feelings for her that had nothing to do with his original purpose. But the moment passed, and he remained silent, caught between worlds. "Thank you for inviting me tonight," he said instead. "It meant a lot." "You fit in well," she said. "Better than I expected, to be honest." "Is that a compliment, Eleanor Bennett?" "Don't let it go to your head, Alexander Black," she replied, but her smile belied the sharpness of her words. "I'll see you tomorrow. Don't be late." With that, she turned and walked away, her figure gradually dissolving into the urban night. Alexander remained beneath the street lamp, the weight of his dual existence settling over him like a shroud. The following morning, Alexander woke early and placed a call to his assistant Thomas, who had been managing his minimal communications with the company during his absence. "I need information on a property we own in Brooklyn," he said without preamble. "A bookstore called Horizon Books. Everything: acquisition history, development plans, current status." "Of course, sir," Thomas replied, his tone betraying no surprise at the unusual request. "When do you need this information?" "Yesterday. Alexander said, then softened his tone. As soon as possible, Thomas. It's important. I'll have it for you within the hour. True to his word, Thomas sent a comprehensive file to Alexander's secure email. What he read confirmed his worst fears. Horizon Books and the surrounding properties were slated for demolition in 3 months to make way for a luxury condominium development. The paperwork only awaited final approval. His approval. Alexander closed the file, his mind racing. He had the power to stop this, to save Eleanor's bookstore and the community it served. But doing so would mean revealing his deception, potentially destroying whatever fragile connection had begun to form between them. And even if he spared Horizon Books, what about the next property and the next? One act of clemency wouldn't change the fundamental nature of his company or the system it perpetuated. With these thoughts weighing heavily, he arrived at the bookstore to find Eleanor already deep in animated conversation with a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit who seemed oddly familiar. "Alexander," Eleanor called, gesturing him over. "This is Julian Hayes from the Historical Preservation Society. He thinks we might have a case for protecting the building." Julian Hayes. The name clicked into place. He was one of the city's most prominent real estate attorneys, known for his occasional pro bono work on preservation cases, and a former classmate of Alexander's at Yale. Alexander's stomach dropped as recognition dawned in Hayes's eyes. "This is my colleague, Alexander Black," Eleanor continued, oblivious to the silent communication happening between the men. "He's been instrumental in our community outreach efforts." Hayes extended his hand, a barely perceptible smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Alexander. Black, is it? A pleasure to meet you. I don't believe we've crossed paths before, have we?" Alexander gripped the offered hand, perhaps more firmly than necessary. "I don't believe so." "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Hayes." "As does yours," Hayes replied smoothly. "Or should I say your family's reputation?" Eleanor glanced between them, sensing undercurrents she couldn't decipher. "Do you two know each other after all?" "No," Alexander said quickly. "Mr. Hayes is simply well known in certain circles." "Indeed," Hayes agreed, his gaze never leaving Alexander's face. "One develops an eye for recognizing people of significance." The implicit threat hung in the air. Hayes could expose him with a single word. "Mr. Hayes has generously offered to look into legal options for protecting the bookstore," Eleanor explained, her excitement palpable. "He believes the building's architectural significance and cultural contribution to the neighborhood might qualify it for landmark status, which would block any demolition plans." "How fortunate," Alexander said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "If you'll excuse me, I need to prepare the store for opening." He retreated to the back room, his mind whirling. Hayes would certainly recognize him as Alexander Blackwood, not the humble bookstore employee he was pretending to be. Whether Hayes would expose him immediately or use the information for leverage remained to be seen, but either way, Alexander's carefully constructed alternate reality was crumbling. When he returned to the main floor, Hayes was gone, and Eleanor was arranging a new display with unusual vigor. "Isn't it wonderful?" she said, her face alight with hope. "Mr. Hayes thinks we have a real chance. He's going to file the paperwork this week. It's not a guarantee, of course, but it's the first real possibility we've had." Alexander managed to smile, unable to dampen her enthusiasm with his fears. "That's fantastic news, Eleanor. I'm happy for you." She paused, studying him. "You don't seem happy. Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong," he lied. "Just don't get your hopes too high. These battles against big corporations rarely end well for the little guy." Her expression clouded. "That's a cynical view from someone who claimed to believe in choosing meaning over money." "I'm being realistic," he said, defensive now. "Companies like Blackwood Enterprises have armies of lawyers specifically to fight these kinds of challenges. So we should just give up? Surrender without fighting?" Her voice rose slightly. "That's not who I am, Alexander. I thought you understood that." "I do understand," he said, wishing he could explain the true complexity of the situation. I just don't want to see you hurt if things don't go your way. I appreciate the concern, she said, her tone cooling, but I don't need protection from disappointment. I need allies who believe in the fight. The rest of the day passed in strained silence, the easy camaraderie of recent weeks replaced by a distance that Alexander felt powerless to bridge. How could he explain his sudden pessimism without revealing the truth? And how could he continue this charade now that Hayes knew his true identity? That evening, as they were closing, Eleanor broke the silence. Diana invited us for dinner tomorrow night. She specifically asked that you come. Apparently, she found your analysis of Wuthering Heights refreshingly non-patriarchal and wants to continue the discussion. Us. She had said us, as if they were a unit, a pairing that others now recognized. Despite the day's tension, Alexander felt a flutter of something dangerously like hope. I'd be honored, he said, if you still want me there. Eleanor sighed, setting down the book she'd been organizing. Look, I'm sorry about earlier. I shouldn't have snapped at you. This place, she gestured around the bookstore, it's more than just a business to me. It's my life's work, my home, my community. The thought of losing it makes me not entirely reasonable. You have nothing to apologize for, Alexander said, guilt washing over him anew. Your passion is what makes this place special, what makes you special. The words hung between them, more revealing than he had intended. Eleanor looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Surprise, certainly, but also something softer, more vulnerable. Thank you, she said quietly. That means a lot, especially coming from you. From me, he echoed, puzzled. Yes, she hesitated, seemingly searching for the right words, different from what I initially thought, more complex, in a good way. Before Alexander could respond to this unexpected admission, Eleanor's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowned slightly and answered. Julian, hello. Yes, he's still here. What? No, that can't be right. Are you sure? Her expression darkened as she listened, her eyes flickering to Alexander with growing confusion. I understand. Yes, thank you for telling me. She ended the call, setting the phone down with deliberate care. The silence that followed was deafening. That was Julian Hayes, she said finally, her voice unnaturally controlled. He had some interesting information about you, Alexander. Or should I call you Mr. Blackwood? Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. Eleanor, I can explain. Explain, she interrupted, her voice rising. Explain how you've been lying to me for weeks. How you pretended to be just another person looking for work when you're actually the CEO of the very company trying to destroy my bookstore. How you sat at my table, drank my coffee, listened to my hopes and fears, all while knowing you could crush everything I care about with a single signature. It wasn't like that, he protested, although in many ways it had been exactly like that. I never intended to hurt you. Your intentions don't matter, she cried, echoing her words from the pub. The outcome is what matters, and the outcome is that you deceived me, infiltrated my life under false pretenses, and made a fool of me. I wanted to experience life without the Blackwood name, he said desperately, to understand the real impact of my company's decisions, to find something authentic. Eleanor laughed bitterly. So I was your poverty tourism, your little experiment in how the other half lives? Did you enjoy slumming it with us commoners, Mr. Blackwood? Was it suitably authentic for you? No, it wasn't like that at all, he insisted, reaching for her hand, which she snatched away. What happened between us? Nothing happened between us, she cut him off, her voice cold as ice. Nothing real. It was all based on a lie. Alexander felt as if he'd been struck. That's not true. My name was a lie, yes, but everything else, my feelings, our conversations, the connection we've built, that was all real. How convenient for you to decide which parts of your deception were acceptable. Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her posture remained rigid with anger. Get out of my store, my life. I never want to see you again. Eleanor, please, get out, she shouted, her composure finally cracking. You have no right to be here, no right to speak to me, no right to look at me with those eyes that never saw me as an equal, only as an interesting diversion from your privileged life." Alexander stood frozen, each word striking like a physical blow. He had deserved her anger, expected it even, but the depth of her hurt was more than he had anticipated. In trying to find authenticity, he had created only more deception, more pain. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, knowing the inadequacy of the words. "Truly I am." "Your sorry means nothing to me," she replied, turning away from him. "Just go." He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "For what it's worth, I never planned to approve the development. Even before I met you, I was questioning the company's direction. That's why I came here in the first place." "For what it's worth," she echoed hollowly. "I don't believe you." The door closed behind him, with a finality that seemed to mark the end of something precious before it had truly begun. Outside, the night was cold and indifferent to his turmoil. Alexander walked aimlessly through the streets, the comfortable disguise of Alexander Black, now feeling like a second skin he was reluctant to shed. Eventually, he found himself at a small park where he collapsed onto a bench, his mind replaying every moment with Eleanor, searching for the exact point where his well-intentioned deception had transformed into something unforgivable. His phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket. Thomas, no doubt, with urgent company matters that had been deferred too long. The real world, his world, demanding his return. But the thought of stepping back into the role of Alexander Blackwood, with its wealth and power and isolation, filled him with a profound weariness. For the first time in his privileged life, Alexander understood what it meant to lose something truly valuable, something money couldn't replace. In seeking authenticity, he had found it only to destroy it with his own hands. 3 days passed in a haze of sleepless nights and distracted days. Alexander returned to his penthouse, to the trappings of his real life, but found no comfort in the luxury that surrounded him. The silence that had once seemed peaceful now echoed with absence. He moved through his spacious rooms like a ghost, haunting his own life. Thomas had arranged for his gradual reintegration into the company, scheduling meetings and briefings that Alexander attended with mechanical efficiency. His board members noted his subdued demeanor, but attributed it to the contemplative retreat he had claimed to be on. None suspected that the true cause of his melancholy was a modest bookstore in Brooklyn, and the woman who ran it with such fierce devotion. On the 4th morning, Alexander made a decision. If he could not undo the deception that had poisoned his relationship with Eleanor, he could at least ensure that Horizon Books survived. He summoned Thomas to his office. "Cancel the development project for the Horizon Books property," he said without preamble. Thomas blinked in surprise. "Sir, that project has been in planning for over a year. The projected return on investment is—" "I don't care about the ROI," Alexander interrupted. "I want the project cancelled, and I want the building transferred to its current occupants at a nominal fee. Draw up the paperwork today. Mr. Blackwood, with all due respect, the shareholders will have questions. This is a significant deviation from established strategy." Alexander fixed his assistant with a steady gaze. "Then perhaps it's time for a new strategy, Thomas. My father built this company on the principle that profit justifies any means. I'm no longer comfortable with that approach." Thomas studied him, sensing the fundamental shift in his employer. "This is about more than just one bookstore, isn't it?" "Yes," Alexander admitted. "It's about what kind of man I want to be, what kind of legacy I want to create." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Draft a broader proposal for a new corporate social responsibility initiative. I want to review all of our current development projects with an eye toward community impact and preservation of cultural spaces." "That's a significant pivot," Thomas observed carefully. "Sometimes significant pivots are necessary when one has been moving in the wrong direction." Alexander turned to look out the window at the city spread below. "Also, I want you to arrange a meeting with Julian Hayes from the Historical Preservation Society." Thomas made note of these instructions, his expression professionally neutral, despite his evident curiosity. "Will there be anything else, sir?" Alexander hesitated. "Yes, find out if Eleanor Bennet has been at the bookstore this week," discreetly. "Deal." After Thomas departed, Alexander remained at the window, watching the interplay of light and shadow across the urban landscape. The city seemed different to him now, not a collection of properties and investment opportunities, but a living organism of interconnected communities, each with its own heartbeat, its own value that couldn't be quantified in dollars. His intercom buzzed, interrupting his reflections. "Mr. Hayes is on line 1, his secretary announced. Alexander took a deep breath and picked up the phone. "Hayes, Blackwood," came the smooth reply. "I must say, this call is not entirely unexpected." "I imagine not," Alexander said dryly. "I'd like to meet. To discuss your undercover escapades or your company's demolition plans for a certain historic building." "Both, potentially. This evening, my office, 7 o'clock. Hayes chuckled. "How could I refuse such a gracious invitation? I'll be there." The call ended, leaving Alexander with the distinct impression that he was about to enter negotiations from a position of disadvantage, an unfamiliar and uncomfortable situation for a Blackwood. At precisely 7, Julian Hayes strode into Alexander's office with the confident air of a man who held valuable cards. They exchanged perfunctory greetings before Alexander directed him to a sitting area with a view of the illuminated city. "Scotch?" Alexander offered, moving to a discreet bar cabinet. "Please, neat." Hayes settled into a leather armchair, his posture relaxed yet alert. "I must say, your little charade at the bookstore was quite unexpected." Alexander Blackwood, titan of industry, shelving paperbacks for minimum wage. "If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." Alexander handed him a crystal tumbler. "I'm sure you've developed your own theories about my motives." "Oh, several." Hayes took a deliberate sip. "The most charitable being that you've developed a conscience. The least being that you were toying with Ms. Bennet for your amusement." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I can assure you, the latter is entirely false. I suspected as much. You don't strike me as deliberately cruel, merely insulated." Hayes leaned forward slightly. "Which makes me curious. What did you hope to gain from your masquerade?" "Perspective," Alexander answered simply. "Something rarely available to people in my position." Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "And did you find it, this perspective?" "Yes, along with several other things I wasn't looking for." Alexander took a seat across from Hayes. "I assume you've told Eleanor everything." "Not everything. I confirmed your identity, naturally. She deserved to know who was really working in her store. But I left the more intimate details of your deception for you to explain." Hayes studied Alexander over the rim of his glass. "Though I gather from her reaction that the revelation was not well received." Alexander looked away. "An understatement. She's a remarkable woman," Hayes observed. "Brilliant, passionate, utterly authentic. I can see why you were drawn to her, even setting aside her considerable physical charms." Something primitive flared in Alexander at Hayes's appreciative tone. "Your point?" Hayes smiled slightly, noting the reaction. "My point is that I understand the complexity of your situation better than you might think. The question now is, what do you intend to do about it?" "I've already cancelled the development project," Alexander said. "I'm transferring ownership of the building to Eleanor at a nominal cost. She'll never have to worry about eviction again." "Ah, the classic wealthy man's solution. Throw money at the problem." Hayes's tone was not unkind, but decidedly unimpressed. "Do you genuinely believe that will repair what you've broken?" "No," Alexander admitted. "I don't, but it's what I can do." "Is it? Is that really all the mighty Alexander Blackwood can do?" Hayes set his glass down with a decisive click. "Let me be direct. I came here tonight expecting to negotiate a preservation agreement for the bookstore. I'm pleased to find that battle already won, but I find myself unexpectedly interested in a different sort of negotiation." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" meaning that Ms. Bennet, despite her current anger, spoke of you with a warmth I rarely hear in her voice. Before she knew your true identity, of course. Hayes leaned back, his expression thoughtful. I've known Eleanor for years. We served on a literary foundation board together. She does not give her trust or her affection easily. That you gained both, even under false pretenses, suggests something genuine existed between you. Hope stirred in Alexander's chest, quickly tempered by realism. She made it very clear she never wants to see me again. Yes, well, people often say things in the heat of betrayal that they don't necessarily mean forever. Hayes finished his scotch and set the glass aside. Here's my proposition. I won't oppose your corporate social responsibility initiative, which, let me guess, will include preserving cultural landmarks and supporting small businesses. Alexander nodded, unsurprised that Hayes had deduced his plans. In fact, I'll actively support it, lending my reputation and expertise to give it credibility among skeptics. In exchange, Hayes paused dramatically. In exchange, Alexander prompted, you make a genuine attempt to reconcile with Eleanor, not with grand gestures or financial solutions, but with honesty. The complete honesty you should have offered from the beginning. Alexander stared at him. That's your condition? That I try to reconcile with Eleanor? Hayes smiled enigmatically. I'm a preservationist at heart, Blackwood. I hate to see valuable things destroyed, whether they're historic buildings or rare human connections. What existed between you and Eleanor, whatever it was becoming, struck me as something worth preserving. Why do you care? Alexander asked bluntly. Let's just say I have my reasons. Hayes rose to his feet. Do we have an agreement? Alexander stood as well, studying the other man with newfound respect. We do. Though I suspect Eleanor may not thank you for your intervention. Hayes laughed. Oh, I'm counting on her fury. Eleanor Bennet in full righteous indignation is a sight to behold, but she'll forgive me eventually. He extended his hand. She might even forgive you, given sufficient time and contrition. Alexander accepted the handshake, feeling as though he had just concluded a most unusual business deal. I wouldn't dare to hope for so much. That, said Hayes, is precisely why there might be hope for you yet. After Hayes departed, Alexander remained in his office late into the night, drafting plans for his new corporate initiative and, more importantly, contemplating how he might approach Eleanor. Every scenario he imagined ended with her rejecting him again, a rejection he knew he deserved. Yet Hayes's words had kindled a dangerous spark of possibility that refused to be extinguished. The following morning brought a call from Thomas. Sir, I've confirmed that Miss Bennet has been at the bookstore all week. Also, the paperwork for the property transfer is ready for your signature. Thank you, Thomas. I'll sign it today. Alexander paused. Has there been any unusual activity at the store? No, sir. Business as usual from all appearances. Alexander released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. At least Eleanor was continuing her normal routine, not so devastated by his deception that she had abandoned her beloved bookstore. One more thing, he added. I'd like a complete dossier on all of Blackwood Enterprises' property holdings in Brooklyn, particularly those with cultural or historical significance or housing small businesses. Of course, sir. May I ask what you're looking for specifically? Alexander considered the question. A pattern and a path towards something better. The dossier arrived by mid-afternoon, a comprehensive catalogue of Blackwood's real estate empire in Brooklyn alone. Alexander was sobered by the sheer scale of his company's holdings and the potential impact of their development plans on countless lives like Eleanor's. It was one thing to know intellectually that his decisions affected many. It was another to see the human cost itemized in stark black and white. He worked through the night, mapping out a new vision for Blackwood Enterprises, one that balanced profit with social responsibility, that viewed communities as partners rather than obstacles. By dawn, he had drafted a proposal that would fundamentally reorient the company's approach to development, focusing on preservation and revitalization rather than demolition and displacement. It was revolutionary, certainly, and would meet resistance from shareholders accustomed to the aggressive expansion strategies of his father's era. But Alexander found himself energized by the challenge in a way that traditional business dealings had never managed to inspire. There remained only the most daunting challenge, facing Eleanor. After much deliberation, Alexander decided against any grand gestures or elaborate apologies. Eleanor deserved simplicity, honesty, and respect, qualities that had drawn him to her in the first place. He would go to the bookstore during quiet hours, say what needed to be said, and accept whatever response she offered, even if it was renewed rejection. He dressed with care, not in the designer suits of Alexander Blackwood, nor the casual attire of Alexander Black, but something in between, an honest representation of himself, without the trappings of either extreme. No disguises, no pretense. When he entered Horizon Books shortly after opening, the familiar scent of paper and coffee enveloped him like a bittersweet memory. The store was empty of customers at this early hour, with only Zoe behind the coffee counter. Her blue hair seemed duller somehow, and her usual cheerful expression hardened when she recognized him. "You've got some nerve showing your face here," she said by way of greeting. "I know," Alexander acknowledged. "Is Eleanor here?" "Why? So you can lie to her some more?" Zoe crossed her arms defensively. "She's in the back, and she's finally stopped crying herself to sleep, so if you're here to mess her up again, I swear I'm here to apologize," Alexander interrupted gently. "And to give her something. After that, I'll leave if she wants me to." Zoe studied him skeptically. "What thing?" "The deed to this building." He patted his jacket pocket where the documents rested. "Transferred to her name, free and clear." Zoe's hostility faltered. "You're giving her the building? Why?" "Because it's hers," he said simply, "in every way that matters." Before Zoe could respond, the curtain to the back room parted, and Eleanor emerged. She froze when she saw Alexander, her face draining of color. The sight of her struck him with physical force. She looked thinner, with shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights to match his own. Yet she was still beautiful to him, perhaps more so in her vulnerability than in her customary fierce composure. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady despite her obvious shock. "I came to apologize," he said, "and to give you something. After that, I'll go if you want me to." Eleanor glanced at Zoe, who shrugged helplessly. "5 minutes," she said to Alexander. "In my office, not out here." He followed her through the curtain to the small room that served as both office and storage space. Books lined every available surface, with a desk so covered in papers that only a small corner remained clear for actual work. It was chaotic, yet oddly efficient, much like Eleanor herself. She turned to face him, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "Say what you came to say." Alexander took a deep breath. "First, I want to apologize for deceiving you. It was wrong, regardless of my intentions. You deserved honesty from the beginning." "Yes, I did," she agreed coldly. "What were your intentions exactly? You never made that clear before I threw you out." "I was trying to understand the real impact of my company's decisions," he said. "To experience life without the Blackwood name opening every door, to find something authentic." "And did you?" she asked, a bitter edge to her voice. "Find your authenticity in our little working-class sideshow?" "I found it in you," he answered honestly, "in your passion for literature, your commitment to this community, your refusal to compromise what matters to you. You showed me what it means to live with purpose and integrity, something I'd been searching for without knowing it." Eleanor's expression flickered, but she maintained her defensive posture. "Poetic. Did you rehearse that on the way over?" "No." He accepted the barb without rancor. "I'm speaking from the heart. Something I should have done much sooner." "Well, your heartfelt speech doesn't change anything," she said. "You lied to me, Alexander, for weeks. You watched me fight to save this place from your company while knowing you could destroy it with a signature. How can I ever trust anything you say? You can't right now. Trust has to be earned, and I destroyed any I might have built with you." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "That's why I brought this. Actions, not words." Eleanor took the envelope warily. "What is this?" The deed to this building transferred to your name. The development project has been cancelled. Horizon Books is safe, and you own this property now. No rent, no landlord, no threat of eviction. Ever. She stared at the envelope, then at him, disbelief warring with suspicion. Why would you do this? Because it's the right thing to do, he said. And because I've realized that what makes a life meaningful isn't accumulating wealth or power, but using whatever advantages you have to protect the things that truly matter. This bookstore matters. To this community, to literature lovers, to you. Eleanor opened the envelope with trembling fingers, scanning the legal documents within. This is real. Completely real, he confirmed. No strings attached, no conditions. Whether you ever speak to me again or not, Horizon Books will remain yours. She set the documents on her desk, visibly shaken. I don't understand you, Alexander Blackwood. First you pretend to be something you're not, then you give away valuable property as if it's nothing. Who are you, really? I'm still figuring that out, he admitted. But I'm trying to be someone who rights his wrongs. Someone who uses his privilege responsibly. Someone worthy of... He stopped himself, unwilling to presume. Worthy of what? She pressed. Of the connection we were beginning to form, he said carefully, before I ruined it with deception. Eleanor's eyes flashed. You think giving me this building erases what you did, that I can be bought? No, Alexander said quickly. I know I've destroyed your trust. The building isn't a bribe. It's simply a correction of an injustice. You should never have had to fear losing this place to begin with. And the rest, the lies about who you were, what you did for a living, were those corrections too? Alexander met her gaze directly. No, those were mistakes. Serious ones. I should have told you who I was from the beginning. I knew you'd never see past the Blackwood name to the person underneath. And I wanted just once to be seen for myself, not my family or fortune. Something in Eleanor's expression softened fractionally. So your solution was more deception? It was wrong, he acknowledged. Inexcusably wrong. I started with good intentions that became more complicated when I began to... He hesitated. Began to what? Her voice was quieter now. Care for you, he finished. More than I'd anticipated. More than was wise, given the circumstances. Eleanor turned away, moving to the small window that overlooked the street. You've given me the building. You've apologized. Is there anything else? Alexander recognized dismissal when he heard it. No, that's all. He moved toward the door, then paused. Except, I meant what I said that night, before everything fell apart. You are special, Eleanor. Not as some experiment in authenticity, but as yourself. I'm sorry I didn't honor that with honesty from the start. He waited a moment, but when she didn't turn or respond, he quietly left the office. Zoe watched him cross the main floor with undisguised curiosity, but he offered no explanation as he exited the bookstore. The bell above the door signaling his departure with the same cheerful ring that had once welcomed him to a different life. Outside, the spring day was bright and clear, the kind of perfect morning that seemed at odds with the heaviness in his chest. Alexander had done what he came to do, made what amends he could. The rest was out of his hands. Eleanor remained at the window long after Alexander had disappeared from view, the deed to her bookstore clutched in one hand. Her emotions were a tempest, anger at his deception still burning bright, confusion at his unexpected generosity, and beneath it all, a treacherous current of something she refused to name. So he actually gave you the building? Zoe asked from the doorway, breaking Eleanor's reverie. Apparently. Eleanor held up the documents. Free and clear. Zoe whistled low. That's not what I expected from a corporate shark. No, Eleanor agreed softly. It's not. She turned from the window. Let's open properly. I need the distraction. The day passed in a blur of customers and tasks. Eleanor functioning on autopilot while her mind continued to process the morning's events. By closing time, she was exhausted yet restless, unable to face the prospect of another evening alone with her thoughts. She called Diana, who listened to the day's developments with uncharacteristic silence before saying, "Come over, bring the documents, and for God's sake, bring wine." Diana's apartment was a cluttered scholar's haven, books stacked on every surface and art covering the walls in a vibrant collage. Eleanor sank into a weathered armchair while her mentor examined the property deed with the critical eye of someone who had navigated academia's political landscapes for decades. "It appears legitimate," Diana concluded, setting the papers aside. "He's actually given you the building. No conditions, no hidden clauses." "I still don't understand why," Eleanor said, swirling the wine in her glass. "What does he gain from this?" Diana studied her over the rim of her reading glasses. Perhaps nothing, perhaps redemption, or perhaps he's simply trying to right a wrong. By throwing money at it? That's the wealthy man's solution to everything. Is it the money that bothers you, or the fact that his gesture has made it harder to maintain your righteous anger? Eleanor frowned. "My anger is perfectly justified. He lied to me for weeks, Diana. He made me believe he was someone else entirely." "Yes, he did," Diana agreed mildly. "A tremendous breach of trust. Unforgivable, one might say." "Exactly. And yet," Diana removed her glasses, folding them carefully, "I wonder if the person you came to know, Alexander Black, was entirely fictional. From what you've told me, and from what I observed myself that night at the inkwell, there seemed to be genuine substance to him." "That's what makes it worse," Eleanor admitted, the words finally breaking free. "I liked him, Diana. I more than liked him. I thought we had something real, something rare, and then to discover it was all built on a foundation of lies." "Was it all lies, though?" Diana asked gently. "The man who discussed Victorian literature with such insight, who treated your customers with respect, who looked at you like you were the most fascinating person he'd ever encountered, was all of that fabricated?" Eleanor stared into her wineglass, unwilling to answer directly. "It doesn't matter. How could I ever trust him again? That's the real question, isn't it?" Diana leaned forward. "Not whether he deserves forgiveness, but whether you're willing to risk being hurt again. Whether what might exist between you is worth that risk." "You sound like you're advocating for him," Eleanor said accusingly. Diana smiled wryly. "I'm advocating for your happiness, my dear. Always have been. I've watched you build walls around yourself for years, keeping people at a distance with that sharp tongue of yours. Then this man somehow scaled those walls, only to prove your caution justified. It's the perfect confirmation of your worldview. People will always disappoint you, so better not to let them close." "That's not fair," Eleanor protested. "Isn't it? When was the last time you took a real risk with your heart, Eleanor? Not just a casual date, but something that could genuinely hurt if it failed." Eleanor fell silent, knowing Diana had struck a nerve. Her caution with relationships was legendary among her friends, a self-protective mechanism developed after watching her parents' volatile marriage implode in her childhood. "I'm not saying you should forgive him," Diana continued more gently. "I'm saying you should ask yourself what you truly want, independent of pride or fear or justified anger." "What I want doesn't matter if I can't trust him," Eleanor said, her voice small. "Trust can be rebuilt," Diana observed. "Slowly, painfully, but it can be done, if both parties are willing to do the work." Eleanor set down her glass with a decisive click. "You've been talking to Julian, haven't you? This has his meddling fingerprints all over it." Diana's innocent expression was entirely unconvincing. "Julian and I may have discussed the situation. He's quite impressed with your Mr. Blackwood's apparent reformation." "He's not my anything," Eleanor said automatically. "Not currently, no." Diana's eyes twinkled with mischief. "But the possibility exists if you're brave enough to explore it." Eleanor groaned, covering her face with her hands. "I hate both of you right now." "No, you don't." Diana patted her knee affectionately. "You're just afraid, and that's perfectly understandable. The question is, will you let fear make this decision for you?" That night, Eleanor lay awake in her apartment above the bookstore, a space that was now unbelievably entirely her own, replaying her interactions with Alexander in a new light. If she were honest with herself, there had been clues to his true identity, his unexpected knowledge of finance and business practices, his discomfort when discussing the Blackwood Company, the quality of his clothing despite his supposed modest means. But there had also been genuine moments: his patience with difficult customers, his enthusiasm for literature, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed at her acerbic commentary. Had all of that been performance? The thought seemed hollow somehow, insufficient to explain the connection she had felt growing between them. By morning, Eleanor had reached no conclusions, only questions that circled endlessly in her mind. She moved through her opening routine mechanically, grateful for the muscle memory that allowed her to function despite her distraction. The morning rush had just subsided when the bell above the door chimed. Eleanor looked up from the register to see Julian Hayes entering, impeccable as always, in a tailored suit that probably cost more than a month's worth of her book sales. "Good morning, Eleanor," he greeted her cheerfully. "How's Brooklyn's newest property owner today?" She narrowed her eyes at him. "Don't play innocent, Julian. Diana told me you two have been conspiring." Hayes pressed a hand to his chest in mock offense. "Conspiring, such an ugly word. We prefer strategic intervention for the emotionally stubborn." Despite herself, Eleanor felt a reluctant smile tug at her lips. "Why are you really here, Julian?" "Two reasons." He held up a finger. "First, to confirm that Blackwood actually went through with the property transfer, which I see he has." A second finger joined the first. "And second, to deliver something to you. If it's another lecture on forgiveness, you can save your breath." "Not a lecture, an invitation." He extracted an envelope from his inner pocket and placed it on the counter. "The Preservation Society is holding a gala this Friday to announce a new initiative, a partnership with Blackwood Enterprises to identify and preserve cultural landmarks and independently owned businesses throughout the city. Your bookstore is being featured as the pilot project." Eleanor stared at the envelope without touching it. "You're working with Blackwood now, after everything you know about his company's history?" "People can change, Eleanor," Hayes said, his usual glibness giving way to sincerity. "Institutions can change, but only if we allow them the opportunity to do so." "Why me? Why this bookstore?" "Because you fought," he said simply. "You refused to quietly disappear when the economic machinery demanded it. And because Alexander Blackwood walked in here and discovered something worth preserving." Eleanor finally picked up the invitation. "I assume his attendance is mandatory, given that it's his initiative." "Indeed, though I believe he would understand if you chose not to attend." She traced the embossed lettering with one finger. "I'll think about it." Hayes smiled. "That's all anyone can ask." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Blackwood asked me to give you a message, should you seem receptive." "Which is?" "The person you knew was real. The name was false, but the man was true." Hayes shrugged elegantly. "Cryptic, I know, but he seemed to think you'd understand." After Hayes departed, Eleanor stood motionless, the invitation in one hand, Alexander's message echoing in her mind. The name was false, but the man was true. Could it really be so simple? Or was she being naive to even consider the possibility? She had no answers, only the knowledge that a decision awaited her, whether to remain safely behind her walls or to risk stepping out into uncertain territory once more. Outside, spring rain began to fall, gentle yet persistent, like the questions that continued to tap at the edges of her consciousness, demanding acknowledgement. The invitation remained on Eleanor's desk for 2 days, untouched yet impossible to ignore. Like a splinter beneath the skin, it demanded attention even when she focused elsewhere. Each time she passed her office, her eyes were drawn to the cream-colored envelope with its elegant gold embossing, a physical manifestation of the choice that loomed before her. By Thursday afternoon, Eleanor could bear the indecision no longer. She closed the bookstore early, hung a sign apologizing for the inconvenience, and walked. For hours, she traversed Brooklyn's streets, her thoughts churning like the gray clouds overhead. The threatened rain held off, as if the very elements were awaiting her decision before unleashing their own resolution. Eventually, her wandering led her to the Brooklyn Heights promenade, where the Manhattan skyline spread before her in a glittering display of ambition made manifest. Somewhere in that forest of glass and steel was Alexander's office, the realm of Alexander Blackwood, so different from the Alexander Black she had known, or thought she had known. "There you are," came a familiar voice behind her. "I was beginning to think I'd have to search every contemplative vista in Brooklyn." Eleanor turned to find Diana approaching, a paper bag clutched in one hand. "How did you find me?" "Process of elimination and educated guesses. You always seek height when wrestling with important decisions. Something about perspective, you once said." Diana settled beside her on the bench. "I brought sustenance for your brooding." The bag contained a thermos of coffee and 2 enormous chocolate chip cookies. Eleanor accepted one gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten since morning. "I suppose you've come to convince me to attend tomorrow's gala," she said between bites. Diana shrugged. "I've come to support whatever decision you make, though I admit a certain bias towards seeing you in that midnight blue gown you bought last year and have yet to wear." Eleanor smiled despite herself. "You're incorrigible." "I'm invested in your happiness," Diana corrected. Especially when you seem determined to stand in its way." They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the last rays of sunlight gild the city's towers. The view was undeniably beautiful, Eleanor thought, but remote, a distant spectacle rather than an intimate reality. Like beauty observed through glass, admired but untouched. Was that how she had been living? Behind glass, safe from hurt but equally protected from true connection. "He lied to me, Diana," she said finally, voicing the thought that continued to circle in her mind. "How can I trust anything he says or does?" "You can't immediately," Diana answered with characteristic directness. "Trust, once broken, can only be rebuilt gradually, through consistent action over time. The question is whether you're willing to allow that process to begin." Eleanor sipped her coffee, letting the warmth seep into her hands. What if it's just another manipulation? A grand gesture designed to assuage his guilt, or worse, to collect me as his latest acquisition? Then you'll discover that too with time. Diana turned to face her fully. "Eleanor, you're approaching this as if there's a perfect choice that guarantees emotional safety. There isn't. Every meaningful human connection involves risk. Some risks seem particularly ill-advised," Eleanor muttered. "Perhaps, but consider this. Would the man you came to know over those weeks, regardless of his name, be capable of such calculated cruelty?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through Eleanor's consciousness. She had been so focused on the deception itself that she had given little thought to the character of the man behind it, the man who had discussed literature with genuine passion, who had treated her customers with respect and patience, who had looked at her with such unguarded admiration. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "That's the problem. I thought I knew him, and I was wrong." "Were you?" Diana challenged gently. "Or did you simply not know everything about him?" "That's semantics, Diana." "No, it's an important distinction. None of us ever knows everything about another person. We only know what they choose to share and what we observe. The question is whether what you did know was fundamentally true, even if incomplete." Eleanor considered this, remembering moments of connection that had felt genuine. Conversations about books that revealed shared values, quiet mornings preparing the store together, the way Alexander had gradually earned the trust of her most difficult customers through sincere engagement rather than superficial charm. "I think," she said slowly, "that there was truth in our interactions, but I don't know if it's enough to outweigh the lie." Diana nodded, accepting this uncertainty. "That's a fair place to begin. Perhaps tomorrow's gala might provide additional data for your assessment." Eleanor gave her a sidelong glance. "You're not being subtle, you know." "Subtlety is overrated at our age," Diana declared, rising from the bench. "Now come along. If you're going to make an informed decision, you need proper rest. And if you do decide to attend, we have exactly—" She checked her watch. 18 hours to make you look devastatingly intelligent and unreachably elegant. Despite her lingering doubts, Eleanor found herself smiling. You've already planned my outfit, haven't you? I've conceptualized several options depending on the emotional effect you wish to achieve, Diana admitted shamelessly. From distant ice queen to approachable but still judging you to I am here under duress but looking fabulous nonetheless. Eleanor laughed, the sound carrying across the promenade like an unexpected gift. What would I do without you, Diana? Let's never find out, Diana replied, linking her arm through Eleanor's as they began the walk home. Life is too short for unnecessary experiments in solitude. The ballroom of the Historical Preservation Society was transformed for the evening's gala, the usual austere elegance given warmth through clever lighting and abundant spring flowers. Eleanor paused at the entrance, momentarily overwhelmed by the glittering assembly within. She had attended such events before, of course, but always as Eleanor Bennett, passionate bookseller and community advocate. Tonight, she entered as something more complicated, the unwitting catalyst for a corporate reformation, the recipient of an unexpected gift, the woman who had perhaps glimpsed the true nature of Alexander Blackwood before even he had fully recognized it. Diana had indeed helped her select the midnight blue gown, its simple lines and luxurious fabric striking the perfect balance between sophistication and understated elegance. Her hair was swept up in a complex knot that showcased the graceful line of her neck, while making her feel armored, prepared for whatever the evening might bring. Miss Bennett, Julian Hayes materialized beside her, resplendent in a tuxedo that would have been ostentatious on a less confident man. You came. I'm delighted. I haven't decided if you should be, Eleanor replied, accepting the glass of champagne he offered. I'm still contemplating your role in this entire drama. Hayes pressed a hand to his heart in mock injury. I'm wounded. I've been nothing but a helpful catalyst for positive change. Meddlesome busybody, more like, she retorted, but without real heat. Ah, but a successful one. Hayes gestured discreetly toward the far side of the room. He's by the eastern windows. Hasn't taken his eyes off the entrance for the past hour. Eleanor deliberately did not follow his gaze. I'm not here for him, Julian. I'm here because this initiative could genuinely benefit communities like mine, because the work matters, regardless of who's funding it. Of course, Hayes agreed, his tone suggesting he believed precisely the opposite. Shall I escort you to your table? You're seated with the committee members and major donors, very prestigious. And completely coincidental in its arrangement, I'm sure, she said dryly. Hayes merely smiled, offering his arm with an old-world gallantry that managed to be charming rather than condescending. As he guided her through the crowd, Eleanor was acutely aware of eyes upon her, some curious, some appraising, some frankly admiring. She held herself with the quiet dignity that had become her hallmark, refusing to be intimidated by wealth or status. Their progress through the ballroom was interrupted frequently by introductions. Board members eager to meet the bookseller who had become the face of the new initiative, preservationists who knew her by reputation, society figures curious about the woman who had apparently captivated the elusive Alexander Blackwood. This last assumption irritated Eleanor immensely. I have not captivated anyone, she informed a particularly persistent dowager who hinted at romantic entanglement. Mr. Blackwood and I have a purely professional relationship centered around preservation efforts. Of course, dear, the woman replied, with a knowing smile that made Eleanor want to overturn the nearest champagne fountain. By the time they reached her assigned table, Eleanor's patience was stretched thin. I need air, she murmured to Hayes. Direct me to the nearest escape route. He nodded toward French doors partially concealed by elaborate floral arrangements. The terrace. But the program begins in 20 minutes. I'll be back, she promised, already moving toward the promised exit. The terrace provided blessed respite from the crowded ballroom. Eleanor drew a deep breath of the cool evening air, letting the city's ambient sounds wash over her. Here, separated from the gala's glittering pretense, she could think clearly again. What was she doing here, really? She had told Hayes she came for the cause, and there was truth in that. The initiative itself was worthy, a genuine effort to preserve the cultural fabric of communities against the relentless tide of homogenized development. But if she were honest with herself, she had also come because of Alexander. Not for him, perhaps, but because of him, because something unfinished lingered between them, demanding resolution. Eleanor. The voice behind her sent a shiver of recognition through her body before she even turned. Alexander stood at the terrace entrance, silhouetted against the light from within. Unlike the other men, in their formal black and white, he wore a midnight blue tuxedo that nearly matched her gown, as if they had coordinated without communication. The coincidence struck her as both absurd and strangely fitting. "Alexander," she acknowledged, proud of her steady tone. He moved to join her at the balustrade, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I wasn't sure you would come." Neither was I until a few hours ago." He nodded, accepting this uncertainty as his due. Up close, Eleanor could see the subtle signs of strain in his face, new lines around his eyes, a certain tightness to his mouth that suggested sleepless nights to match her own. "Thank you," he said simply. "Your presence lends credibility to the initiative that my involvement alone couldn't provide. Is that why I'm here? As window dressing for your corporate redemption?" The words came out sharper than she intended, her defenses rising automatically. Alexander winced, but didn't retreat. "No," he said quietly. "The initiative would proceed with or without your attendance. Your participation enhances it, certainly, but is not required for its success." "Then why thank me for coming?" He met her gaze directly, his eyes reflecting the city lights behind her. "Because seeing you again matters to me personally, regardless of the professional context." The naked honesty in his voice caught Eleanor off guard. This was not the smooth corporate executive she had expected, nor the somewhat awkward bookstore employee she had known. This was someone new, or perhaps someone who had existed all along beneath both personas, now finally emerging without disguise. "I don't know what to do with that information," she admitted. A small smile touched his lips. "You don't have to do anything with it. It's simply a truth I wanted to share." They stood in silence for a moment, the distant sounds of the gala providing a muted backdrop to their private tableau. Eleanor studied him covertly, noting the subtle ways he had changed since she'd last seen him. There was a new confidence in his posture, but not the arrogance she had expected from a billionaire CEO. Rather, it seemed like the quiet assurance of a man who had made difficult decisions and was prepared to live with their consequences. "Julian tells me you're revolutionizing Blackwood Enterprises," she said finally, "transforming from corporate villain to community savior." "I wouldn't use such dramatic terminology," Alexander replied. "We're simply redirecting our resources toward more sustainable and community-oriented development. It's not altruism. It's good business for the long term, and good PR in the short term," she observed. He acknowledged this with a slight inclination of his head. "Yes, but a genuine change of direction nonetheless." "Inspired by your time as a minimum-wage bookstore clerk?" She couldn't quite keep the edge from her voice. "Inspired by many things," he said carefully, "including, yes, my experience at Horizon Books. It showed me what I'd been missing in my understanding of community value. But also inspired by my own dissatisfaction with the company my father built, a dissatisfaction that existed before I ever walked into your store." Eleanor wanted to maintain her skepticism, but there was an authenticity to his words that was difficult to dismiss. "So what happens now? You give away a few buildings, fund some preservation projects, and all is forgiven?" "No," he said, surprising her again. "Nothing so simple. What happens now is the long, unglamorous work of reforming a corporate culture, of evaluating each project through a new lens, of earning trust through consistent action rather than grand gestures." He paused. "As for forgiveness, that's not mine to claim or expect, especially from you." Before Eleanor could respond, Julian appeared at the terrace doorway. "There you both are. Alexander, they're ready for your speech. Eleanor, your presence is requested at the main table. Alexander straightened his jacket, a brief flash of vulnerability crossing his features before his public face settled into place. Duty calls. Indeed. Eleanor moved toward the doors, then paused. What will you say? In your speech? The truth, he replied, as completely as I can. Inside, the ballroom had been arranged for the formal presentation. Eleanor took her place at the designated table, acutely aware of the curious glances directed her way. On the small stage, Julian introduced Alexander with a flourish that managed to be both grandiose and genuinely warm. When Alexander took the podium, a hush fell over the room. Eleanor had expected the confident presence of a man born to privilege and power. Instead, he began with a quiet humility that immediately commanded attention. "Good evening," he said, his gaze sweeping the assembled guests before briefly meeting Eleanor's. "I stand before you tonight not as the heir to the Blackwood fortune, but as a man who has recently been granted the rarest of gifts, the opportunity to see the world through new eyes." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "For most of my life, I viewed the urban landscape as my father taught me to see it, as a collection of properties with potential values, as opportunities for development and profit. Buildings were assets, neighborhoods were markets, communities were abstract concepts on demographic reports." A murmur rippled through the audience. This was not the standard philanthropic speech they had anticipated. 3 months ago, I walked into an independent bookstore in Brooklyn, a property my company had acquired and planned to demolish for luxury condominiums. I went anonymously, seeking to understand something I couldn't quite articulate even to myself. What I found there changed me in ways I'm still discovering. Eleanor felt heat rise to her face as several heads turned in her direction. Alexander continued, his voice gaining strength. "I discovered a place where literature was not merely sold, but celebrated, where community was not a marketing buzzword, but a living reality, where profit was secondary to purpose. I met people who fought passionately for their neighborhood's soul, who recognized that a city's true value lies not in its real estate prices, but in the unique cultural ecosystems that give it life and meaning." He gestured to the Preservation Committee members seated near Eleanor. "The Historical Preservation Society has long understood what I have only recently begun to grasp, that the character of our city is worth protecting, that progress need not come at the expense of cultural heritage, that development without conscience is not development at all, but destruction dressed in economic terminology." The room had grown utterly silent, the usual background murmur of a gala completely stilled. Alexander's gaze swept across the audience once more. "Today, Blackwood Enterprises announces a fundamental shift in our approach to urban development. In partnership with the Historical Preservation Society, we are launching the Cultural Heritage Initiative, a comprehensive program to identify, preserve, and enhance spaces of cultural and community significance throughout the city." He outlined the details of the initiative: financial commitments, evaluation criteria, community involvement protocols, with a precision that demonstrated both thorough preparation and genuine commitment. Eleanor found herself impressed despite her lingering reservations. "This is not charity," Alexander emphasized, his voice taking on a new intensity. "It is an investment in the city's future, in its vibrant diversity, in the very qualities that make New York not merely valuable, but invaluable. We are not sacrificing profit for principle, but recognizing that true prosperity must be measured in more than quarterly returns." He paused, his expression becoming more personal. "I want to acknowledge someone whose influence on this initiative cannot be overstated. Eleanor Bennett, proprietor of Horizon Books, who taught me, though she did not know she was teaching, that authenticity cannot be purchased, that community cannot be manufactured, and that some things, once lost, cannot be replaced at any price." Eleanor felt the weight of every gaze in the room. She maintained her composure through sheer force of will, her expression revealing nothing of the emotional tumult beneath. Ms. Bennett did not know who I was when I walked into her bookstore seeking employment, Alexander continued, a note of confession entering his voice. I presented myself as someone other than Alexander Blackwood, heir to a real estate empire. It was a deception born of curiosity but sustained by cowardice, my failure to reveal myself once I understood the impact of my company's plans on her business and community. A shocked murmur ran through the audience. Such public admission of wrongdoing was virtually unheard of in these circles. When the truth came to light, Ms. Bennett rightfully ejected me from her store and her life. Her integrity stands in stark contrast to my deception. Yet the lessons I learned through our brief association have profoundly altered my understanding of value, community, and responsible corporate citizenship. Alexander's gaze found Eleanor again, direct and unflinching. I owe Ms. Bennett an apology that no speech or initiative can adequately express, but I hope that the changes implemented at Blackwood Enterprises will demonstrate that her influence extends far beyond one bookstore or one chastened CEO. He turned back to the wider audience, his posture straightening. The Cultural Heritage Initiative begins today with the preservation of Horizon Books and its surrounding block, but it will not end there. We are committed to a new vision of development, one that builds upon existing community strengths rather than erasing them, that views cultural spaces as assets to be enhanced rather than obstacles to be cleared. Alexander concluded with a call to action directed at his fellow business leaders, challenging them to reconsider their own approaches to urban development and community engagement. The applause that followed was thunderous. Whether from genuine inspiration or simple relief at the speech's conclusion, Eleanor couldn't tell. As Alexander stepped from the podium, surrounded immediately by well-wishers and potential partners, Eleanor remained seated, processing what she had just witnessed. His public acknowledgement of his deception had been unexpected. A corporate leader admitting personal wrongdoing was rare enough to qualify as newsworthy. That he had done so in a room full of New York's elite, risking both reputation and ridicule, suggested either remarkable courage or calculated strategy. Perhaps both. Well, Diana murmured beside her, that was certainly not the standard philanthropic blather one expects at these affairs. No, Eleanor agreed, still watching Alexander as he navigated the crowd with a grace that somehow didn't read as artifice. It wasn't. He exposed himself rather thoroughly, Diana observed. Both professionally and personally. That's not insignificant. Eleanor nodded absently, her mind still processing the implications of Alexander's speech. He had not simply announced a new corporate initiative. He had publicly redefined his company's fundamental approach to business, and he had done so while acknowledging her influence, not claiming her as a conquest or using her as a prop, but crediting her as a catalyst for genuine change. You're thinking very loudly, Diana noted with amusement. I'm trying to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the man I now see, Eleanor admitted. They seem simultaneously completely different and fundamentally the same. Perhaps they are, Diana suggested. Perhaps we all contain multitudes, as Whitman would say. The formal presentation concluded, the gala dissolved back into its original social function. Clusters of elegant people engaged in the delicate dance of networking and influence. Eleanor found herself approached by preservationists eager to discuss potential projects, community advocates seeking advice on protecting their own neighborhoods, and society figures suddenly interested in the quaint concept of independent bookstores. She navigated these conversations with practiced grace, though her awareness remained fixed on Alexander's location within the room. He seemed similarly occupied with an endless stream of interactions, yet somehow they never drifted into each other's immediate orbit. Whether by design or circumstance, they remained apart as the evening progressed. It was nearly midnight when Eleanor decided she had fulfilled her social obligations sufficiently to depart without appearing rude. She made her farewells to Diana and the committee members, collected her wrap from the coat check, and slipped out into the quiet lobby, relieved to escape the persistent hum of conversation. "Leaving so soon?" Eleanor turned to find Alexander standing near the grand staircase as if he had been waiting for her. Perhaps he had. "It's late," she said simply, "and I open the store at 9 tomorrow." He nodded. "May I walk you out? My car can take you home." The offer was presented neutrally, without presumption. Eleanor considered refusing, then reconsidered. "Walking out would be appreciated. As for the car, I'm perfectly capable of finding my own way home." "Of course," he agreed immediately. "I didn't mean to suggest otherwise." They descended the stairs together, their steps falling into natural synchronization. Outside, the spring night was clear and cool, the city's lights reflected in puddles from an earlier rain. "Your speech was unexpected," Eleanor said as they stood on the sidewalk. "Too revealing," he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his tone. "Surprisingly honest," she corrected, "especially for this crowd." Alexander smiled slightly. "I've discovered I have little patience left for pretense, an unexpected side effect of my time at Horizon Books." The mention of their shared past hung between them, both acknowledgement and question. Eleanor studied him in the gentler illumination of the street lamps, noting again the subtle changes in his appearance, a certain weathering that made him seem more substantial, less like a figure from a glossy magazine, and more like a man of flesh and blood and complexity. "I still don't understand why you did it," she said finally. "Why maintain the deception for so long? You must have known the truth would eventually emerge." "I did," he admitted. "But each day I convinced myself that tomorrow would be the right time to confess, that I needed just one more day of being seen as Alexander Black rather than Alexander Blackwood." He met her gaze directly. "And then, as I began to care for you, the stakes became impossibly high. I feared losing whatever was growing between us. So instead, you guaranteed its destruction," she observed, without the bitterness that would have colored such words weeks earlier. "Yes, my attempt to preserve something valuable ensured its loss, an irony that hasn't escaped me." A taxi approached, its light indicating availability. Eleanor raised her hand to hail it, then hesitated. "Your initiative, is it real? Will it last beyond the positive press?" "Yes," Alexander said without hesitation. "It's already been incorporated into our corporate charter and bylaws. The board has approved binding commitments that cannot be easily reversed, even if future leadership were inclined to try." Eleanor nodded, satisfied with his answer. "Good. That matters more than personal considerations." "Does it?" he asked quietly. The taxi pulled to the curb, waiting. Eleanor faced Alexander fully. "I don't know what you want from me." "A chance," he said simply. "Not forgiveness, that would be presumptuous. Not trust, that must be earned over time. Just a chance to show you who I truly am, without deception or pretense." "And who is that exactly? Alexander Black? Alexander Blackwood? Some combination of both?" "Just Alexander," he replied. "A man who values literature and conversation and authenticity. A man who is trying to use his privilege responsibly. A man who has never felt more himself than when shelving books in your store, discussing Victorian novelists, seeing the world through your uncompromising perspective." His honesty was disarming, stripping away Eleanor's carefully constructed defenses. "I don't know if I can give you what you're asking for." "I understand," he said, disappointment evident in his voice, though he tried to mask it. "In your position, I might feel the same." Eleanor opened the taxi door, then paused. "Do you remember the discussion we had about Jane Eyre? About how Rochester's deception, however well-intentioned, violated Jane's autonomy?" Alexander nodded, surprise flickering across his features at the unexpected literary reference. "You said something that stayed with me," Eleanor continued. "You said that the tragedy wasn't the deception itself, but Rochester's failure to recognize that true connection could only exist between equals, that by controlling the narrative, he denied Jane the dignity of choice." "I remember," Alexander said softly. You understood the book better than you understood your own actions. Eleanor's tone held no accusation, only observation. Yet, here you are now, offering me choice rather than managing outcomes. That suggests growth. A fragile hope kindled in his eyes. Does that mean— It means, Eleanor interrupted, that I'm willing to have coffee, one coffee, at neutral territory, not my bookstore, not your office. Next week, perhaps. The smile that transformed Alexander's face then was unlike any expression she had seen from him before. Neither the careful charm of Alexander Blackwood nor the restrained warmth of Alexander Black, but something entirely new and genuinely radiant. Coffee, he repeated, as if she had offered him a kingdom. Neutral territory. Next week. Don't make more of this than it is, she cautioned. It's coffee, not absolution. Understood. He stepped back from the taxi, his posture straightening. Until next week, then. Eleanor settled into the taxi, giving the driver her address. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, she allowed herself one glance back at Alexander's solitary figure on the sidewalk. He remained watching until the taxi turned the corner, disappearing from view. The following Saturday, Eleanor arrived at the agreed-upon cafe precisely on time. It was a small establishment in Greenwich Village, equidistant from her bookstore and his office, belonging to neither of their territories. She had chosen her outfit with care, a simple dress that suggested neither special effort nor deliberate casualness. Her hair loose around her shoulders rather than in her usual practical bun. Alexander was already there, seated at a corner table with 2 cups before him. He rose when he saw her, a gesture that seemed motivated by genuine respect rather than performative chivalry. "You came," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I said I would." Eleanor settled into the chair opposite him. "I keep my promises." The implied criticism was gentle rather than barbed. Alexander accepted it with a slight nod. "I've ordered for both of us. Presumptuous, perhaps, but I thought you might appreciate not waiting in line." He gestured to one of the cups. "Earl Grey, 1 sugar, no milk. Still your preference?" The fact that he remembered such a small detail from their time together touched her unexpectedly. "Yes, thank you." An awkward silence descended, both of them suddenly uncertain how to proceed without the familiar structure of the bookstore or the formal context of the gala. They were simply 2 people now, with a complicated history and an undefined future. "How is the store?" Alexander asked finally. "Thriving, actually," Eleanor replied, warming to this safe topic. "We've seen increased foot traffic since the announcement of the preservation initiative. Apparently everyone wants to visit the bookstore that reformed a corporate titan." Alexander winced slightly. "Not quite how I would phrase it, but I'm glad business is good." "And your company? Has there been backlash to your new direction?" "Some," he acknowledged. "Certain shareholders are concerned about short-term profits, but others see the long-term value in sustainable, community-oriented development. It's a process of education and persuasion." Eleanor sipped her tea, studying him over the rim of her cup. "You seem different, more comfortable in your own skin." "I am," he said simply. "For most of my life, I've been playing a role, the dutiful son, the worthy heir, the responsible CEO. Even as Alexander Black, I was performing a part. Now I'm trying to simply be myself, whatever that means." "And what does it mean?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Alexander considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "It means acknowledging my privilege without being defined by it. It means using the power I've inherited to effect positive change rather than simply accumulating more wealth. It means valuing authenticity over appearance, substance over status." He paused. "It means recognizing that the most meaningful connection I've ever experienced came when someone saw me, really saw me, without the Blackwood name coloring her perception." The directness of his response caught Eleanor off guard. She had expected polished evasion or careful neutrality, not this raw honesty. "That connection was built on a false premise," she reminded him, though without the anger that had once accompanied such thoughts. The premise was false, Alexander agreed. The connection itself was not, at least not for me. He met her gaze steadily. But I understand why you would question its validity. Eleanor found herself at a crossroads. She could retreat into justifiable doubt or risk stepping forward into uncertainty. The safer choice was clear. Yet, as she looked at the man across from her, neither the humble bookstore employee nor the powerful CEO, but someone more complex and authentic than either, she felt the walls she had constructed begin to crack. "I've been thinking about something Diana said," she admitted, setting down her cup. "About how none of us ever knows everything about another person. We only know what they choose to share and what we observe. The question is whether what we do know is fundamentally true, even if incomplete." Alexander listened intently, hope and wariness mingling in his expression. "The man who worked in my store," Eleanor continued carefully, "who discussed literature with genuine passion, who treated my customers with respect, who looked at me as if what I said actually mattered, was he real?" "Yes," Alexander said without hesitation, "more real than I'd been in years, perhaps more real than I'd ever allowed myself to be. And now, who are you now?" "Still becoming," he answered honestly. "But I hope someone worthy of a second chance. Not entitled to it, not expecting it, but worthy of consideration." Eleanor felt something shift within her. Not forgiveness precisely, but a willingness to consider possibilities beyond the neat categories of victim and deceiver, right and wrong. The world, she knew from her beloved Victorian novels, was rarely so simple. Human hearts rarely so easily classified. "I'm not ready to trust you," she said finally, "but I'm willing to explore the possibility that trust might eventually be rebuilt." The smile that transformed Alexander's face then was worth every moment of uncertainty that had preceded it. A smile of genuine joy, untainted by triumph or relief. The smile of a man granted an unexpected gift he knew he had not earned, but would cherish nonetheless. "That's more than I dared hope for," he said quietly. "Don't make me regret it," she warned, though the words lacked their former edge. "I'll try not to," he promised. "Though I should warn you, I'm still learning how to be authentic rather than merely successful. There may be missteps along the way." "Authenticity isn't a destination," Eleanor observed. "It's a practice, one that requires consistent effort and occasional failure." "Spoken like a true Victorian scholar," Alexander said, a teasing warmth entering his voice. "Shall we discuss the moral complexities of Middlemarch next? I seem to recall you had strong opinions about Dorothea's choices." Eleanor found herself smiling, the familiarity of literary debate offering comfortable ground on which to build something new. "I maintain that her second marriage represents pragmatic happiness rather than transcendent fulfillment. And I continue to believe that Eliot was suggesting the value of human connection over intellectual abstraction," he countered, falling easily into their old pattern of friendly disagreement. As they debated Eliot's intentions and Dorothea's motivations, Eleanor felt a cautious optimism unfurl within her. This man across from her was neither the humble clerk nor the powerful executive, but something more interesting than either. A person in progress, as complex and contradictory as the characters they discussed, as capable of growth as any protagonist worth following to the final page. When their cups were empty and the afternoon light had begun to soften toward evening, Eleanor gathered her belongings, aware that a decision point had arrived. "This was not unpleasant," she said, her understatement deliberate. "High praise indeed," Alexander replied with a smile that acknowledged her reserved assessment. "Might I hope for a sequel?" Eleanor considered him for a moment. "Yes," she decided, "but next time, I choose the venue." "Of course." He rose as she stood, careful not to presume further. Until then, outside they paused on the sidewalk, the moment awkward with possibility. Eleanor extended her hand formally, a gesture that simultaneously established boundaries and acknowledged connection. "Goodbye, Alexander," she said, his name unaccompanied by either surname, a subtle recognition that he existed now as neither Black nor Blackwood, but simply himself. He took her hand briefly, the contact warm and steady. "Goodbye, Eleanor. Thank you for this chance." They parted then, moving in opposite directions down the busy street. Eleanor did not look back, but she felt lighter somehow, as if she had set down a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. The future remained unwritten, the path unclear, but she walked with the cautious optimism of a reader who suspects, despite complications and setbacks, that the story might yet unfold towards something worth the journey. 3 months later, Alexander stood in Horizon,